I am Ethan Mercer. I am 28 years old, and I have been paralyzed from the waist down since the horrific car accident that permanently split my entire existence into a before and an after. 2 years ago, my own flesh and blood, my older brother, shattered my spine because he was too busy texting and driving drunk. But destroying my physical body simply was not enough for him. At his lavish six-figure engagement party, while I was sitting quietly in my wheelchair just trying to support him, he looked at me with absolute, unfiltered disgust. He locked the wheels of my chair, looked me dead in the eye, and violently dragged me onto the floor in front of 80 wealthy guests. I lay there bleeding from shattered glass while my father looked down at me and called me the family's biggest failure. They laughed. They pointed. They told the horrified crowd I was faking my paralysis for sympathy. But there was one massive, life-altering thing my toxic family did not know. They had no idea that I was no longer the helpless, broke, disabled burden they thought I was. They didn't know about the multimillion-dollar tech software contract I had just signed in secret, and they certainly didn't know that an observant doctor in that very room had already called 911. Within 15 minutes, 5 police officers walked through those heavy oak venue doors, and the entire party froze. My brother went from a bragging, arrogant corporate executive to a sniveling criminal begging for his life on the floor. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my abusive family and took back my life, hit that like button if you believe that karma always comes to collect its debts. And please, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means the world to me. Now, let's go back to the exact moment the floor literally dropped out from under me. I hit the floor hard. The impact was deafening. My head struck the sharp, unyielding edge of the low acrylic photo platform, and shattered glass from a dropped tray of expensive champagne flutes sliced deep into the palm of my right hand. The physical pain was a hot, sudden flash of white light exploding behind my eyes. My lower body, the legs I had not felt in 2 long years, lay twisted at a bizarre, unnatural angle on the polished stone floor. It was an angle I could see with my own 2 eyes but could not feel, which somehow made the nightmare infinitely more terrifying. For a few agonizing, suspended seconds, nobody moved. The soft jazz music playing from the live band in the corner abruptly stopped. The hired photographer, a guy who had been snapping away just seconds before, slowly lowered his expensive camera, his mouth hanging open in shock. I was lying there in a cream button-down shirt and a tailored suit jacket, bleeding bright red blood onto the pristine, imported stone floor of the Skyline Glass Hall, a luxury rooftop event space in downtown Charlotte that cost more to rent for one night than most people make in a year. I looked up, trying to blink away the dark spots dancing in my vision. My brother, Julian Mercer, stood towering above me like a conqueror. His chest was heaving up and down, his face flushed a deep, angry red with adrenaline and rage. For one impossible, fleeting second, my naive heart actually thought he might realize the absolute gravity of what he had just done. I thought I might see a flash of brotherly panic, a moment of realization that he had just assaulted a disabled man. Instead, Julian looked down at the blood pooling around my hand, looked at the horrified guests staring at us in dead silence, and he sneered. "Look what you made me do," Julian hissed, his voice vibrating with venom, echoing in the dead silent room. "You ruined my engagement photos. You always ruin everything." That exact moment, lying in a puddle of my own blood and spilled champagne, was the turning point of my entire existence. That was the exact second I stopped feeling embarrassed about my wheelchair and my broken body. Embarrassment is a heavy, suffocating blanket that belongs to people who still think they owe the room an apology. I was bleeding profusely because my own brother had physically assaulted me, and my parents, standing just 3 feet away, cared more about a damaged aesthetic photograph than my actual life. My mother, Eleanor, gasped loudly, pressing her perfectly manicured hand to her chest, but she did not rush forward. She didn't drop to her knees to check my pulse or use her expensive silk scarf to stop the bleeding. She just looked away, her face contorted in sheer disgust, terrified of the social scandal unfolding in front of her country club friends. My father, Richard, A man who built his entire identity around his reputation, his high-ranking corporate salary, and his golf handicap, crossed his arms over his chest. He looked at my broken body on the floor like I was a piece of rotting garbage that had blown in from the street and ruined his lawn. "Get up, Ethan. Stop making a spectacle of yourself." My father barked, his voice laced with pure contempt. I gripped the cold stone floor with my good hand. The room was spinning violently. Guests were whispering behind their hands. Some of the younger attendees were subtly pulling out their phones, the glowing screens capturing my ultimate humiliation. But how did I end up here? How did a son, a brother, become a literal stain on his own family's pristine, carefully curated image? How did the people who were supposed to protect me become the very monsters I needed protection from? To truly understand why my brother felt utterly entitled to assault me in front of dozens of important people, and why my parents allowed it to happen without batting an eye, you have to know about the night my legs were violently taken from me. You have to know the sick, twisted, criminal secret my family buried under a mountain of lies to protect their precious golden child's future. I thought the worst day of my life was the day I woke up and realized I would never walk again. I was so incredibly, tragically wrong. The worst day was the day I realized my family wished I had died in that car instead. 2 years before the engagement party from hell, I actually had a normal, thriving life. I was 26 years old, working a solid job in IT, putting money into my 401k, saving up for my own piece of real estate, and living completely independently in a small but comfortable apartment. Julian was 31 back then, and he was already ruthlessly climbing the corporate ladder as a project development director for a massive, global luxury hotel group. Julian was the undisputed golden boy of the Mercer family. He was conventionally handsome, fiercely ambitious, and fiercely protected by my parents. He was the son who brought home the massive salary, the son who dated models, the son who would eventually secure their legacy, manage their inheritance, and ensure their retirement was spent on cruise ships rather than in a nursing home. I was just the quiet younger brother who fixed their computers and blended into the background. It was a cold, miserable Friday night in November. Julian's hotel company had just closed a massive real estate deal, and he had spent the entire evening at a high-end downtown bar celebrating with his coworkers. I was the designated driver. I was always the designated driver when Julian wanted to party, because God forbid the golden boy pay for a cab. When it was time to leave, Julian was heavily intoxicated. He could barely string a sentence together. He had been arguing aggressively over text with his closest friend and coworker, a guy named Derek. Derek was the ultimate manipulator, a toxic, snake-like guy who loved stirring the pot and watching people burn for his own amusement. Derek had sent Julian a message mocking him about a missed promotion, and Julian was seeing absolute red. I practically begged Julian to let me drive his car. I held my hand out for the keys, trying to reason with a drunk man. He laughed right in my face, shoved his shoulder hard into my chest, snatched the keys, and forced me into the passenger seat. "I'm fine, Ethan," he slurred, slamming the heavy car door. "Stop being such a dramatic loser. I drive better drunk than you do sober." The rain was coming down in thick, blinding sheets. The roads were slick, black mirrors reflecting the glaring streetlights. Julian kept his expensive leather shoe heavy on the gas pedal, tearing down the winding suburban road at nearly 80 miles an hour. His eyes were constantly darting down to the glowing screen of his phone, his thumbs furiously typing out angry replies to Derek's toxic messages. I remember gripping the door handle, my knuckles turning completely white. My heart was pounding in my throat. I screamed at him to watch the road. I yelled that there was a sharp curve coming up. He didn't even look up. He just yelled at me to shut up. I remember the sharp, violent, overcorrected jerk of the steering wheel. I remember the tires losing all traction, hydroplaning across the flooded asphalt. I remember the sickening, deafening crunch of metal folding around us, crushing inward like a cheap tin can as the car slammed head-on into a concrete barrier, and then total, suffocating darkness. I woke up what felt like a lifetime later in a sterile, freezing hospital room. The sharp, chemical smell of bleach and iodine made my stomach violently churn. The rhythmic, agonizing beep of the heart monitor filled the silence. I tried to shift my weight. I tried to move my legs. Nothing happened. The sheer, primal panic that sets in when your brain sends a desperate command to your limbs and absolutely nothing happens is a terror I cannot adequately put into words. It is a suffocating, drowning sensation. My mother was sitting by the cold window, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. My father was pacing frantically at the foot of my bed, his cell phone glued to his hand. When the orthopedic surgeon finally came into the room and delivered the news, a severe T12 spinal cord injury, meaning permanent, irreversible paralysis below the waist, I expected my parents to break down. I expected my mother to hold my hand. I expected my father to tell me everything would be okay. Instead, the very second the doctor closed the heavy wooden door, my father walked right up to the side of my hospital bed. His face was grim, hard, and entirely calculating. He didn't ask about my pain level. He didn't ask how I was coping with the fact that my life was over. "Ethan, listen to me very carefully," my father said, his voice low, urgent, and devoid of any paternal warmth. "Julian is facing incredibly serious criminal charges. A felony DUI resulting in severe bodily harm. If he gets a criminal record, he loses his corporate job. He loses his promotion. He loses everything. He will go to prison. He cannot survive that." I stared at him, my mind foggy and sluggish from the heavy intravenous painkillers. "He was driving, Dad," I whispered, my throat raw from the breathing tube. "He was completely drunk. He wouldn't let me drive." My mother rushed forward, but she didn't hug me. She grabbed my arm with frantic, nervous energy, her nails digging into my skin. "Ethan, please. Family protects family. We are handling the insurance claims. We will make sure your hospital bills are paid out of our own pocket. We will tap into the college fund we saved for your future kids. But if you tell the police Julian was driving recklessly, it will destroy him. It will destroy this entire family's reputation. Just tell the cops the weather was bad. Say a deer ran out into the road. Say you hit your head and you don't clearly remember the details of who was driving. Please, Ethan. Do this for your mother." They weren't asking me. They were demanding it. They were actively trading my working legs, my independence, and my absolute truth for Julian's corporate promotion and their own pristine social standing at their precious HOA meetings. They aggressively guilt-tripped me, crying fake tears about how a massive lawsuit and a criminal trial would completely bankrupt the family. They claimed the legal fees would eat up their 401k retirement funds and force them to sell the real estate portfolio they planned to leave us as an inheritance. Broken, heavily medicated, physically shattered, and desperate for my parents' love in the absolute darkest, most terrifying moment of my life, I caved. I broke. When the police detective came to my hospital bed with a notepad, I looked away and told him I couldn't clearly remember the crash. I said it was raining too hard. That lie was the biggest, most devastating mistake of my entire life. The very moment the threat of jail time and a criminal record vanished for Julian, my family's narrative completely and radically shifted. The accident wasn't Julian's fault anymore. Oh no, it was terrible road conditions. It was an unavoidable tragedy. It was fate. Julian never paid a single dime in restitution. My parents handled the bare minimum of my initial medical bills and then abruptly cut me off, acting like my very existence and my ongoing physical therapy was a massive drain on their finances. I spent 2 years trapped in a customized, heavy, matte black wheelchair. To me, that chair was my only remaining freedom. Without it, I was staring at a ceiling all day. But to my family, my wheelchair was a giant, rolling neon sign that constantly reminded them of their own horrific guilt and moral bankruptcy. It was a physical stain on their perfect lives. I became an invisible, unwanted ghost in my own family's home. When they hosted their fancy Thanksgiving dinners or neighborhood cocktail parties, I was conveniently and quietly asked to stay in my bedroom so I wouldn't depress the wealthy guests. Julian treated me like an annoying, pathetic charity case. He would look down at me like I was a loser who just didn't try hard enough to get better. But I didn't just sit in my room and cry. I used the silence. I used the brutal isolation. Over those 2 agonizing years, I taught myself advanced coding, artificial intelligence algorithms, and complex software architecture. I started developing specialized accessibility software designed to help severely disabled individuals navigate complex digital platforms and corporate interfaces. I built an entire tech company from my laptop, working late into the night until my eyes burned. Nobody in my family knew. They thought I was just sitting in my room playing video games and living off my meager government disability checks. They didn't know I was quietly negotiating massive, multi-million-dollar licensing deals with major global tech firms. They didn't know I had hired a ruthless corporate lawyer named Evelyn Vance to manage my contracts. Then came the embossed, gold foil invitation to Julian's engagement party. He was marrying Sophia Whitmore, a beautiful, intelligent woman from a very wealthy, old-money family. My parents made it abundantly clear they didn't want me to go. They hinted heavily that the venue wasn't accessible enough, and that I would just be uncomfortable. But I decided to go anyway. Part of me, some stupid, broken, hopeful part of my inner child, still desperately wanted to believe there was a loving family waiting for me behind all the cold smiles, forced holiday photos, and whispered insults. I brushed my hair, put on a sharp, tailored suit that hid the atrophy in my legs, and wheeled myself straight into the lion's den. I told myself I was strong enough. I told myself I could survive one single evening in a room full of superficial people who would look at my wheelchair with pity before they ever bothered to look at my face. I had absolutely no idea I was rolling straight into a meticulously planned trap designed to break me once and for all. The venue was absolutely breathtaking, but it was designed specifically to make you feel incredibly inferior if your bank account didn't have enough zeros. Skyline Glass Hall had towering, 30-foot glass walls, polished, imported marble floors, and a sweeping panoramic view of the glittering city skyline. There were hundreds of rare white orchids hanging from expensive gold architectural frames, and hundreds of champagne-colored pillar candles lining every single table. It looked exactly like a centerfold spread in a high-end luxury bridal magazine. It looked expensive enough to make basic human kindness feel completely out of place. The strict dress code for the evening was white, gold, and champagne. I had tried my absolute best to blend into their perfect aesthetic. I wore a crisp cream dress shirt, a tailored beige suit jacket, and I even went out of my way to wrap a subtle, expensive gold silk scarf around the sidebars of my chair to match the theme. But my chair was matte black, heavy-duty metal. It was industrial, it was loud, and it was undeniably real. Couldn't be disguised by a piece of silk. The very moment I pushed open the heavy double doors and rolled into the grand hall, the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. You could feel the drop in temperature. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes darted toward my wheels, lingering on my useless legs, and then quickly darted away in feigned politeness. I saw my parents standing near the massive, fully stocked open bar. My father, Richard, stood tall and rigid in his custom tuxedo, holding a tumbler of scotch, acting like the whole room owed him a military salute. My mother, Eleanor, was wearing a gown that cost more than my first car. She was currently the chair of several local charity committees, ironically championing causes like community inclusion and severe disability awareness. She loved posing for the local newspaper photographers, holding oversized charity checks and smiling benevolently. But when her own paralyzed son rolled into her perfect, curated party, her smile instantly evaporated. Her jaw tightened so hard I thought it might snap. She looked at me like I had tracked dog feces onto a priceless white Persian rug. Julian spotted me next. He was standing in a circle with a group of major investors and high-ranking executives from his hotel group. His eyes dropped to my wheels, and a look of absolute, unadulterated disgust crossed his face. He quickly excused himself from the executives, his face a mask of barely contained fury, and marched aggressively over to me. He didn't hug me. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't ask how I was doing or if I needed help finding a table. He leaned in, kissed the empty air near my cheeks strictly for the benefit of the watching onlookers, and whispered right into my ear. "Ethan, you actually made it," Julian said. "It wasn't a greeting. It was a threat. It was an accusation." "Congratulations on the engagement, Julian," I said, looking up at him, trying to keep my voice completely steady. I really, truly wanted to mean it. I wanted to be a good brother. He barely nodded, his eyes completely dead. He quickly glanced nervously toward the massive, expensive rose wall set up for the professional photos, where his and Sophia's initials were glowing in soft, romantic neon light. "Listen to me," Julian whispered sharply. "Just try not to park yourself in every single picture tonight, okay? Sophia has been stressed enough planning this without having to worry about tripping over your wheels. Keep a low profile." Before I could even process the cruelty of his words, Derek, Julian's toxic shadow and the man who essentially egged Julian on to drive drunk that fateful night, sauntered over. Derek was swirling a glass of expensive scotch, an arrogant smirk plastered across his face. "Well, well, well. Look who it is," Derek sneered, looking down at me. "Hey there, Wheels. Surprised you braved the traffic. Didn't think you had it in you to leave the house." I completely ignored Derek. I gripped my wheels and moved my chair toward the far side of the massive room, parking myself near a large structural pillar where I wouldn't block anyone's path. I had spent 2 long, humiliating years learning exactly how to make myself physically smaller for other people's comfort. I was constantly calculating emergency exits, the thickness of rugs, the placement of table legs, and watching out for drunk people stepping backward without looking. But apparently, even hiding in the dark shadows near a concrete pillar, my very existence was ruining their precious aesthetic. My mother strutted over, the heels of her designer shoes clicking sharply against the marble. She was holding a crystal champagne flute. She leaned down, keeping a wide, terrifyingly fake smile plastered on her face for the benefit of the guests watching us, and spoke through tightly clenched teeth. "Ethan, darling," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Could you do me a huge favor and move much farther away from the main seating area? The professional photographer is trying to get wide background shots, and your equipment is highly distracting in the frame." I looked at my own mother, my chest tightening with a familiar, suffocating pain. "Where exactly do you want me to go, Mom? I'm already in the corner." Her eyes flicked nervously toward a dark, narrow hallway near the public restrooms. "Just somewhere less central, sweetie. Go wait by the coat check. This is Julian's big night. Don't ruin it." My father joined her a second later, and he didn't even bother keeping his voice down or faking a smile. "Ethan, why does every single family event always have to become a pity party about you?" he demanded roughly. I stared at him in utter disbelief. I had literally been sitting in complete silence for 20 minutes. I hadn't spoken to a single guest. "You always find a sneaky way to remind people you're broken," my father sneered, gesturing vaguely at my chair. "You could have made an effort to stay home. Your brother is trying to build a massive corporate future tonight. His CEO is here. Do not make this weird." I gripped the rubber rims of my wheels so hard my palms physically ached. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the microphone from the band and tell the whole room that I had a bright future too, right up until Julian drunkenly smashed it into a concrete barrier while texting Derek. But the psychological conditioning ran incredibly deep. The paralyzing fear of causing a scene, of being labeled the crazy, bitter, crippled brother, held my tongue hostage. I rolled away, heading out toward the cold terrace doors just to escape their toxic presence. As I passed a large group of Julian's colleagues near the bar, I heard his voice ring out clear as a bell over the low jazz music. "Oh, ignore Ethan. He exaggerates everything," Julian was saying loudly to Derek and another senior executive. "The doctors told us he could probably walk with braces if he actually tried. But Ethan likes being taken care of. He's lazy." Someone in the wealthy circle murmured a sympathetic, enabling response. Julian laughed. A cruel, sharp, dismissive sound that cut me to the bone. "Yeah, exactly. It gets him sympathy from women. You know how family drama is. He's faking half of it just to guilt-trip my parents into paying his rent." My blood turned to absolute ice. faking it. He paralyzed me. He stripped me of my independence, forced me to lie to a police detective to save his miserable skin, stole my physical future, and now he was standing in a room full of millionaires telling his corporate buddies that I was faking a severed spinal cord for attention. I stopped my chair dead in its tracks. I didn't turn around. If I reacted, I was the unstable, emotional, jealous brother. If I stayed silent, I looked guilty. Either way, Julian controlled the entire narrative. But I wasn't the only one who heard his vile lies. A woman standing near the extravagant dessert table slowly turned her head. She was wearing a sharp, tailored navy blue dress, and she had an air of absolute, unshakable authority. I didn't know her name yet, but I would soon learn she was Dr. Maya Lin, a top-tier trauma surgeon. She locked eyes with me across the room. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with deep, calculating, professional concern. Just as I was about to wheel myself out onto the freezing balcony to get some air and escape the nightmare, the overly enthusiastic event coordinator tapped a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to do formal family photos at the Rose Wall now. Immediate Mercer family, please step forward to the platform." I felt a sickening, heavy knot form deep in my stomach. The storm wasn't just coming. It was already here, and there was absolutely nowhere left to hide. The designated photo area was staged like a high-budget Hollywood movie set. There was a low, incredibly slippery acrylic platform sitting right in front of the massive glowing rose wall. Right in the dead center were two ornate, velvet-cushioned gold lounge chairs specifically reserved for Julian and Sophia. Surrounding them were smaller, extremely narrow, backless decorative stools for the immediate family members. Any person who uses a wheelchair or anyone with a basic understanding of human anatomy knows the severe problem instantly just by looking at that setup. Those decorative chairs were visually stunning for a magazine, but they were flimsy, incredibly narrow, and insanely unsafe for someone with a severe spinal cord injury. Because my permanent injury is completely severed at the T12 level, I have absolutely zero core stability or muscle control below my waist. I cannot feel my legs, I cannot flex my glutes, and most importantly, I cannot brace myself or catch my balance if my torso starts to tip over. Transferring from a wheelchair onto a stable, standard height, backed medical surface takes time, proper grips, and careful maneuvering. Being forced to physically drag my dead weight onto a slick, backless prop chair sitting on a raised, polished plastic platform in front of 80 staring, judgmental people was an absolute recipe for a catastrophic physical injury. I rolled up to the very edge of the acrylic platform and stopped my chair, locking my own brakes for stability. Sophia, looking incredibly stressed in her stunning champagne silk dress, gave me a small, tight, incredibly nervous smile. I could tell she was completely on edge, finally starting to sense the deeply toxic, abusive undercurrents of the Mercer family dynamic. Julian stepped right off the platform, walked right up to my wheelchair, and crouched down. He slapped a fake, gentle, loving brotherly smile on his face for the cameras flashing in the background. But his eyes were completely dead, cold, and utterly merciless. His voice was a menacing, guttural whisper pushed through tightly gritted teeth. "The photographer is ready, Ethan," Julian hissed, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "Get out of the damn chair and sit on the gold stool for 2 minutes. Don't make me ask twice." I kept my voice very low, desperately trying to reason with him and prevent a scene. "Julian, please listen to me. I cannot sit there safely. The chair is too narrow and it has no back support. My wheelchair is perfectly fine. It's black, it blends in. Just put me on the far end of the group shot if you want me out of the center." He let out a sharp, incredibly patronizing laugh. "You always have a pathetic excuse, don't you?" The wealthy guest standing in the front rows chuckled politely, entirely mistaking the interaction for lighthearted, competitive sibling banter. My mother stepped up onto the platform, nervously adjusting the floral arrangements on the wall that absolutely did not need adjusting, refusing to look at me. My father aggressively folded his arms across his chest, glaring literal daggers at me. "I'm not refusing to be difficult, Julian," I pleaded, feeling the cold sweat violently prickle on the back of my neck. I physically need back support. If I lose my core balance on that slick plastic platform, I will fall hard. Julian abruptly stood up straight. He dropped the fake, loving smile. He raised his voice just loud enough so the first 3 rows of important guests, including his boss, could clearly hear every word he said. Isn't it absolutely amazing, folks, how my brother's injury mysteriously flares up exactly when the attention moves away from him and onto someone else? Julian announced loudly, spreading his arms wide in mock disbelief. A few people in the crowd awkwardly laughed. Derek, standing near the front, let out a loud, obnoxious snort. My face burned with absolute, soul-crushing humiliation. I looked desperately at my father, begging him silently with my eyes to step in, to be a parent, to show 1 single ounce of human decency. He gave me nothing. Just try to be normal for once, Ethan. Stop embarrassing us in front of my colleagues. My father commanded, his voice echoing in the hall. My mother leaned in, her heavy designer perfume literally suffocating me. Please, Ethan, stop this right now. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. That was it. That was the phrase that broke the camel's back. That was the Mercer family motto used to silence me for years. Don't make a scene when Julian stole my savings. Don't make a scene when Julian drove drunk and destroyed my body. Don't make a scene when I woke up paralyzed and they forced me to commit perjury to protect a violent criminal. I looked at the impossibly narrow gold chair. I looked at Julian's smug, arrogant, highly punchable face. I looked at my parents, who would gladly watch me crawl on the floor if it meant they got a nice picture for their mantelpiece. And for the very first time in 2 long, agonizing years, the dormant, suppressed fire inside my chest violently ignited. I gripped the cold metal rims of my wheels. I squared my shoulders, sitting as tall as my broken spine would allow, and I looked my abusive brother dead in the eye. No, it wasn't a shout. It wasn't hysterical. It was quiet, firm, cold, and absolute. Julian's jaw clenched so intensely I thought his teeth would shatter into powder. He stepped dangerously close to me, his large body completely blocking my view of the crowd, casting a dark shadow over me. You think you can humiliate me in front of my CEO? In front of my entire company? He whispered, his breath hot and toxic on my face. You think this is your stage, you pathetic cripple? I just want to stay in my chair, Julian, I said firmly, not breaking eye contact. Something deep behind Julian's eyes completely snapped. The corporate mask fell off, revealing the monster underneath. Without breaking eye contact, his right hand dropped down to the side of my wheelchair. Click. He violently slammed the brake down on my right wheel. Then his left hand moved swiftly across my lap. Click. He locked my left wheel. My chair was completely immobilized. I was trapped. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw sudden movement. Dr. Maya Lin, the woman in the navy dress, stepped sharply away from the dessert table, her eyes wide with alarm. I saw her hand slide quickly into her purse, pulling out her cell phone. On the other side of the room, Liam Hayes, a junior executive who always despised Julian's arrogance, quietly raised his smartphone, hitting record. Julian didn't notice any of it. He was too consumed by his own unchecked rage. He spun around, flashing a brilliant, terrifyingly fake smile at the crowd. I'm going to physically help my brother join the family photo, everyone, Julian announced loudly, playing the sick role of the patient, saintly sibling dealing with a difficult burden. He gets a little anxious and dramatic sometimes. He turned back to me. His eyes were completely unhinged. My heart hammered violently against my ribs like a trapped bird. Julian, don't touch me, I warned, my voice trembling with genuine, primal fear. The grand room went dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. Sophia stepped forward, her face completely pale. Julian, she said softly, stop, leave him alone. He completely ignored his fiancée. He leaned down and grabbed my upper arms. He didn't grip me gently under the armpits to assist a proper medical transfer. He dug his thick fingers into my biceps like I was a piece of heavy, inanimate luggage. I dug my own fingers desperately into my armrests, my knuckles turning white. "Stop! Julian! Stop! I can't balance!" I yelled, my voice cracking. Julian leaned, his face mere inches from mine. "Quit faking it for sympathy," he hissed. And then, with all of his adrenaline-fueled strength, my brother violently yanked me forward. Everything happened in devastating, agonizing slow motion. My body lurched violently out of the chair before I could raise my hands to protect my face. My useless legs twisted beneath me, heavy and dead, catching on the footrests. I reached frantically for the wheel, the acrylic platform, the empty air, anything to stop the violent forward momentum. But his grip jerked me sideways and upward. For one terrifying, suspended second, I hung in the air between my locked wheelchair and the hard, unforgiving stone floor, knowing exactly what was coming and utterly powerless to stop it. And then, he let go. I hit the sharp edge of the acrylic platform first, and the sound of my skull making bone-jarring impact echoed over the sudden, terrified silence of the room. A massive, heavy tray of expensive champagne flutes crashed down right beside me with the sound of a small explosion. Crystal shards flew in every direction, and my right hand, the one I had braced myself with, landed squarely in the center of the broken glass. The pain was immediate, sharp, and blinding. Bright red blood began to pool on the pristine, polished stone floor, spreading quickly like a horrific ink blot. My shoulders slammed into the hard floor with a sickening, heavy thud, and my lower body, dead, heavy, and completely beyond my control, twisted awkwardly on top of my own trapped, lifeless legs. For one impossible, agonizing second, I looked up at my brother Julian. His chest was heaving with exertion. His face was a mask of unbridled, ugly rage. He looked down at the broken glass. He looked at my bloodied hand, and he looked at the 80 wealthy guests who were staring at him in sheer, unadulterated horror. He didn't see a brother he had just assaulted. He saw an inconvenience. "Look what you made me do," Julian hissed, adjusting his tuxedo jacket with trembling, angry fingers. "You ruined my engagement photos. You are absolutely unbelievable, Ethan. Why do you always have to be this way?" He actually expected me to apologize. He genuinely expected me to drag my bleeding, broken body out of the frame so he could continue his perfect evening and smile for the high-end photographer. But before my father could step forward to berate me and force me to hide the injury, a woman's voice sliced through the heavy tension like a razor blade. "Nobody touch him. Do not move him." It was the woman in the navy dress. Dr. Maya Lin pushed her way through the paralyzed socialites and dropped to her knees right into the spilled champagne and jagged glass. She didn't care one bit about ruining her designer dress or the potential risk to her own safety. She placed one firm, steady hand near my shoulder and the other gently beside my head, physically blocking my mother, who had finally decided to take half a step forward but clearly intended to lecture me rather than help. "I am a trauma physician," Dr. Lin announced, her voice commanding and absolute. "He has a known spinal cord injury. If any of you try to move him to save face, you could sever what is left of his cord. Step back. Now." She leaned down, locking eyes with me, shielding me from the vultures surrounding us. "Ethan, can you hear me? Do not try to nod. Just blink. You are not alone." I blinked, tears stinging my eyes. My vision was blurry from the shock and the blood loss, but her presence was a literal anchor. Julian scoffed loudly, pacing back and forth like a caged animal who had just realized the trap he was in. "Oh, please. She's overreacting. He's fine. He does this all the time for attention. He literally just slipped because he refused to sit properly." Dr. Lin slowly turned her head and looked up at my brother. The absolute disgust in her eyes could have frozen boiling water. "I saw you lock his wheels before you laid your hands on him," she said, her voice turning to pure ice. "I saw you grab his upper arms. I heard him tell you not to touch him. That was not a slip. That was a violent, premeditated assault. And I have already called 911. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the guests. Julian's arrogant, untouchable smirk finally faltered for the very first time in his life. He looked over at his fiancée, Sophia, who was staring at him like he was an actual monster from a horror movie. "Babe," Julian said, holding his hands up defensively, his voice cracking. "Tell them I was just helping him. You saw it. He's dramatic." Sophia took a slow, deliberate step backward, putting distance between them. She slipped her massive diamond engagement ring off her finger and held it tight in her palm, looking at the stone as if it were contaminated. "I don't even know who you are," she whispered. My father, terrified of the impending social scandal and the loss of his corporate connections, finally marched forward. "Ma'am, I am Richard Mercer. I worked closely with law enforcement for years. This is a private family matter. You are making wild accusations you do not understand. My son was simply assisting his disabled brother." Dr. Lin stood up, wiping my blood off her hands with a linen napkin. "A disabled man is bleeding on the floor after being violently ripped from his mobility device. That is not a family matter, Mr. Mercer. That is a felony assault." Before my father could threaten her with a lawsuit, Liam Hayes, one of Julian's junior executives, stepped right into the center of the chaos. His face was pale, but his hands were steady. He held up his smartphone. "I have the whole thing on video," Liam said loudly. "I started recording when Julian locked the wheels. I thought he was just going to move the chair out of spite. I didn't think he would actually rip him out of it. I've got every second of it. Every threat. Every violent motion." Julian completely panicked. He lunged toward Liam, his dignity vanishing. "Give me that phone, Liam. You are misunderstanding what you saw." "Step back, Julian," Liam warned, holding the phone out of his reach. "I am absolutely done covering for you. I'm done with this entire company's culture." And right at that exact moment, the heavy elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged open. Heavy, authoritative footsteps echoed across the marble floor. 5 police officers in dark uniforms walked into the luxury skyline glass hall, stepping past the white orchids and gold candles, and the entire engagement party completely froze in terror. The lead officer, Officer Davis, took one look at the scene. A man bleeding on the floor, a locked wheelchair sitting empty on a plastic platform, broken glass everywhere, and Julian sweating through his expensive tuxedo, looking like a cornered rat. "Who called 911? Officer Davis demanded. Dr. Lin raised her hand. "I did, officer. I witnessed a physical assault and requested a medical response for a spinal cord trauma patient." Julian lost his mind. "Assault? Are you insane? He is my brother. This is my engagement party. I am a senior corporate director. You cannot do this here." My father tried to physically step between the officers and Julian. "Officer Davis, I assure you, this is a massive overreaction. My daughter-in-law is stressed. My son was trying to be helpful, and my youngest son here is highly emotional. We can handle this internally." Officer Davis didn't even blink. He pointed a finger at my father's chest. "Sir, step back right now, or you will be placed in handcuffs for obstructing a criminal investigation. Do you understand me? Or do you want to join your son in the back of the squad car?" It was the very first time in my entire 28 years of life that I had ever seen my father obey another man. He stepped back, his face completely pale. Paramedics rushed in behind the officers, bringing a metal stretcher. For the first time that entire night, my broken, shivering body was handled with actual medical respect and care. While the paramedics wrapped my bleeding hand and secured my neck, Officer Davis watched Liam's video on his phone. I couldn't see the screen from the stretcher, but I heard the audio playback. I heard Julian's voice say, "Quit faking it for sympathy," followed by the violent crash. Officer Davis handed the phone back to Liam and walked straight up to Julian. "Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back." "You have got to be kidding me." Julian laughed, a desperate, hysterical sound. He looked around the room, making eye contact with his boss, the CEO of the hotel group Winston Thorne. Winston was a billionaire real estate mogul who had been standing quietly in the back the entire time, his arms crossed. "Winston," Julian called out frantically. "Tell them who I am. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. My career is on the line here." The crowd parted as Winston Thorne slowly walked forward. He was an older man, sharp, ruthless, and highly respected. He didn't even look at Julian. Winston walked right past my screaming brother, right past my horrified, shrinking parents, and stopped directly beside my stretcher. Winston looked down at me. He looked at my face, then at my customized wheelchair, and a look of absolute, profound recognition washed over his face. "Ethan?" Winston asked softly. "Ethan Mercer?" I looked up at him and nodded slowly, despite the pain. "Mr. Thorne, we usually meet over Zoom." The entire room went dead silent. Julian stopped fighting the police. My father's jaw hit the floor. Winston Thorne turned to face my brother. "Julian," Winston said, his voice echoing like a judge reading a death sentence. "For the last 6 months, our hotel group has been negotiating a massive, multimillion-dollar licensing contract to integrate revolutionary accessibility software into all of our global properties. The brilliant, anonymous tech developer I have been working with, the man I respect more than anyone in this room, is your brother, Ethan. And I have been waiting months to meet him in person." Julian's eyes bulged out of his head. "What? No, Ethan is unemployed. He lives off government disability checks." Winston shook his head in absolute disgust. "Ethan is the CEO of a tech firm that makes your entire department look like a lemonade stand. And effective immediately, Julian, you are terminated. Your severance package is void due to a violation of our corporate morality clause. You are done in this industry, and I will personally see to it that you never work in real estate again." The hospital room was freezing, sterile, and smelled overwhelmingly of harsh hospital-grade bleach, pulling me right back to the horrific night of the car crash 2 years ago. My shoulder was heavily bruised, and I had just received 12 stitches in my right palm to close the jagged, deep gash from the champagne glass. Thankfully, the emergency CT scans showed no new damage to my fragile spinal cord. But as anyone with a severe spinal cord injury will tell you, hearing "no new damage" is a hollow victory when you are already living with the permanent, agonizing consequences of the old damage. I was lying in the hospital bed, staring at the drop ceiling, when the heavy door swung open. My parents walked in. They didn't knock. My mother was wearing dark designer sunglasses indoors, trying to hide her swollen, crying, and panicked eyes. My father looked like he hadn't slept a wink, but his posture was still rigid, fueled by pure, unadulterated anger at the inconvenience I had caused them. Neither of them asked how my head felt. Neither of them looked at my bandaged hand. My father walked right up to the bed, closing the door firmly behind him. "Your brother spent the entire night in a holding cell because of this ridiculous mess you caused. Ethan, do you have any idea how much this is going to cost us in legal fees?" I slowly turned my head to look at him. "Because of the mess I caused?" I repeated, my voice completely flat, deadening the impact of his words. "Julian assaulted me, Dad. He broke my hand. He broke a glass tray over me. I am the victim here." My father's jaw tightened. "Do not twist my words, Ethan. He made a stupid mistake. He was under an immense amount of pressure. His CEO was there. Sophia's wealthy family was there. You know how incredibly sensitive Julian is about looking bad in front of investors. You provoked him by refusing to sit in the chair." My mother sat down in the plastic, uncomfortable visitor's chair and reached out to touch my arm. I flinched and pulled my arm away. Her face crumpled, not with maternal guilt, but with deep, wounded offense. "Ethan, please," my mother begged, her voice trembling. "He is your brother. He is about to lose absolutely everything. His engagement is off. Winston Thorne fired him publicly. If you press these felony assault charges, he will have a criminal record. He will never get hired in corporate real estate again. Think of the family inheritance. Think of our reputation. You have no idea what this lawsuit will do to him. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. I know exactly what losing everything feels like. Mom, I said coldly. He took my legs 2 years ago. Now he took my dignity. I am not protecting him anymore. The truth is coming out. My father slammed his hand on the metal bedside table. If you do not drop these charges, Ethan, we will cut you off entirely. We will not pay a single medical bill. You will be dead to us. We will disown you. I actually laughed. It was a dark, hollow, terrifying sound. Cut me off from what, Dad? You haven't paid a dime for my care in 18 months. And as your boss's boss just made abundantly clear, I don't need your money. I have my own. Before my father could scream at me again, the hospital room door opened. It was Sophia. She was still wearing the same coat from the night before, her makeup smudged beneath her eyes, but her expression had transformed into something else entirely, a mix of rage and clarity. My mother immediately stood up. Sophia, honey, please don't be here. Ethan is just upset. Julian loves you. This is all a huge misunderstanding. Stop talking, Eleanor, Sophia said sharply, cutting my mother off completely. She didn't even look at my parents. She walked straight to the side of my bed. I am so incredibly sorry, Ethan, Sophia whispered, her voice cracking. I believed him. For 2 whole years, I believed his lies. He told me that you were the one driving that night. He told me that you were drunk, that you grabbed the steering wheel out of his hands, and that he heroically tried to save you. He said your parents had to drain their retirement accounts to pay off the insurance companies because you were so unstable. My stomach violently turned. I felt physically sick. Even after everything Julian had done, even knowing how evil he was, I had absolutely no idea his lies ran that deep. He hadn't just blamed the weather. He had actually blamed me for my own paralysis. Sophia reached into her designer purse and pulled out a small silver USB drive. She placed it gently on my tray table. When the police arrested him last night, he begged me to go to his apartment and clear out his home office before the cops got a search warrant, Sophia explained, her voice hardening. He wanted me to destroy his old laptop. Instead, I backed up every single file. I found the old text messages. I found the messages between him and Derek from the exact night of your crash. Derek was taunting him, telling him to drive faster. Julian replied that he was completely wasted but didn't care. I also found the blackmail emails. Derek has been extorting Julian for thousands of dollars every month to keep his mouth shut about who was really driving the car that paralyzed you. The silence in the hospital room was deafening. The twist was completely exposed. My parents were frozen, their faces draining of all color. The golden child wasn't just a drunk driver. He was being blackmailed, bleeding the family finances dry to cover up a violent, life-altering crime. Sophia, you cannot give him that, my father stammered, stepping forward. That is stolen property. That is Julian's private data. It's evidence of a cover-up and criminal extortion. A new, sharp voice rang out from the doorway. We all turned to see a tall woman in a sharp gray suit walk into the room, carrying a thick leather briefcase. This was Evelyn Vance, my corporate attorney, and one of the most ruthless litigators in the state. I had called her the second the paramedics put me in the ambulance. Ethan Mercer is my client, Evelyn said, stepping between my father and my bed, her presence completely eclipsing his. And if you two do not leave this hospital room immediately, I will have hospital security drag you out, and I will personally file a formal restraining order against both of you for witness tampering and harassment. My father tried to puff out his chest, but Evelyn didn't even blink. She stared him down with the cold, dead eyes of a shark smelling blood in the water. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly terrified of the legal consequences, my parents finally backed down. They practically ran out of the room, leaving the heavy door to swing shut behind them. Evelyn picked up the USB drive Sophia had placed on the table. She looked at me, a dangerous, victorious smile playing on her lips. Well, Ethan, Evelyn said, opening her briefcase and pulling out a pristine legal pad. It looks like we aren't just filing a civil lawsuit for battery and emotional distress from the party. We are reopening the investigation into the original car crash. We are going after his assets, we are going after Derek, and we are going to expose everything until there is nothing left. I looked at my bandaged hand, and then I looked at the window, watching the morning sun rise over the city. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel like a victim hiding in a wheelchair. I felt like a man holding a loaded weapon, and I was ready to pull the trigger. "Burn it all down, Evelyn," I said. "Take everything." The fallout was spectacular, swift, and entirely merciless. In today's digital age, you cannot lock a disabled man in his wheelchair, drag him across a stage, and expect it to stay a secret. Liam Hayes' video from the engagement party was leaked to a local news outlet, and within 48 hours, it went completely viral. It spread through private corporate group chats, local neighborhood Facebook pages, and massive gossip accounts that thrived on watching beautiful, wealthy people fall from grace. They blurred my face out of respect, but Julian's face was crystal clear. His cruel, mocking voice yelling, "Quit faking it for sympathy," became a national soundbite for entitlement and abuse. The luxury hotel group didn't just fire him. They released a scathing public statement completely distancing themselves from his actions, using cold corporate jargon to ensure he would be blacklisted from the commercial real estate industry for the rest of his natural life. Sophia didn't just cancel the wedding. She hired her family's incredibly expensive divorce lawyers to handle the separation of their shared assets. She had the engagement ring couriered back to Julian in a cheap cardboard box with no note. She completely scrubbed him from her life, leaving him to face the music entirely alone. When the police presented the evidence from Sophia's USB drive, the drunk texts, the extortion payments to Derek, the proof of the cover-up, Julian's high-priced defense attorney completely threw in the towel. The threat of a massive, highly publicized trial terrified Julian more than anything else. He couldn't handle the thought of his country club friends sitting in a gallery watching his entire life be dissected. So they begged Evelyn for a plea deal. I sat in my customized wheelchair in the back of the courtroom the day the deal was finalized. Julian was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit. He looked 10 years older. He had lost weight, and his arrogant swagger was completely gone. The judge forced him to stand up and verbally admit his guilt on the public record. Julian Mercer pleaded guilty to felony assault causing bodily injury for the incident at the party, and he confessed to reckless driving and filing a false police report for the car crash 2 years prior. The judge sentenced him to 90 days in the county jail, followed by 5 years of incredibly strict probation. He was mandated to complete intense anger management courses, perform 600 hours of community service specifically at a severe spinal cord injury rehabilitation center, and he was slapped with a permanent, ironclad no-contact order protecting me. But the criminal charges were just the appetizer. The civil lawsuit was the main course. Evelyn Vance completely dismantled my family's finances. Because Julian was technically broke now, having lost his corporate salary and his bonuses, the financial liability fell directly onto the people who had actively covered up his initial crime and funded his lifestyle. My parents. The civil settlement was finalized at a staggering $410,000. That money was specifically calculated to cover my past medical bills, my future specialized physical therapy, the cost of retrofitting a home for wheelchair accessibility, and severe emotional distress caused by years of their orchestrated lies. My parents had always prioritized their wealth and their image over my well-being. Now, to keep Julian out of state prison for a longer sentence, they had to pay the ultimate price. They were financially ruined. To come up with the massive settlement cash, my father had to sell his beloved, pristine vintage Porsche for significantly less than it was worth. They had to completely drain their 401k retirement accounts, taking massive tax penalties in the process. They had to sell their beautiful summer lake house, and they were forced to take out a massive second mortgage on their primary real estate. They lost their country club memberships. They stopped hosting their fancy HOA dinners because absolutely nobody in their elite social circle wanted to sit at a table and pretend they didn't know the Mercers had bankrupted themselves to protect an abusive criminal. The day the wire transfer cleared into my bank account, my parents cornered Evelyn outside the courthouse. My mother was sobbing hysterically, screaming that I was destroying the family, that they were going to have to work past retirement age, that I had taken everything from them. Evelyn just adjusted her glasses, looked at my weeping mother, and said, "You didn't lose your money because of Ethan. You lost your money because you bet all your chips on a toxic, abusive horse. Have a nice day." Julian lost his freedom, his career, and his fiancée. My parents lost their wealth, their pristine reputation, and their comfortable retirement. They had sacrificed my legs to protect the golden child, and in the end, the golden child burned their entire empire to the ground anyway. 18 months after the gavel fell, I woke up in a home where every single doorway belonged to me. I used the settlement money to buy a beautiful, modern, single-story property. I spent months working with architects to customize every square inch of it. The hallways were extra wide. The floors were smooth, polished hardwood with absolutely no rugs to catch my wheels. I had a massive roll-in shower, lowered kitchen counters so I could cook my own meals, and a sweeping back patio filled with morning sun where I could drink my coffee in total peace. I didn't buy the house because $410,000 somehow magically healed my severed spinal cord. Didn't. I still wake up with nerve pain. I still have days where the sheer frustration of living in a seated world makes me want to scream. But that money, that house, gave me the one thing my family had violently stripped away from me: absolute, uncompromising independence. My tech company, built from the confines of my childhood bedroom, exploded. Partnering with Winston Thorne's global hotel group was just the beginning. We secured contracts with airlines, major universities, and international hospital networks. My software was helping millions of disabled people navigate digital interfaces without barriers. I went from being the Mercer family's hidden shame to a recognized CEO in the tech industry. A few months ago, a local nonprofit organization asked me to come speak to newly injured patients at a rehabilitation center about independent living. At first, I almost said no. I didn't feel like an inspiration. I wasn't a superhero. I was just a guy who had survived a family that fundamentally confused silence with loyalty. But I went anyway. I sat in front of a room full of people in wheelchairs, people with walkers, people missing limbs, and I told them the absolute truth. I told them that losing your mobility is incredibly hard, but losing the basic human right to be believed by the people who are supposed to love you hurts infinitely more. I told them that asking for basic access is not begging. I told them that a wheelchair is not a symbol of failure or a medical tragedy. It is a tool of absolute freedom. After the speech, a young guy, maybe 20 years old, rolled up to me. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "I thought my life was completely over after my accident. Now, looking at you, I think maybe it's just different. Thank you." That single interaction stayed with me far longer than any apology my family could ever offer. Speaking of apologies, Julian did send one eventually. It arrived in a cheap, stamped envelope from the county jail just weeks before his 90-day sentence was up. It was 3 pages of cramped handwriting. He wrote that he was sorry for humiliating me at the party. He wrote that he was sorry for the car crash. He claimed that he hated my wheelchair because it was a constant, physical reminder of the monster he had become. He begged me to call him when he got out. I sat on my beautiful, sunlit patio, reading the letter. I didn't rip it up in a fit of rage. I didn't cry. I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of emptiness. I mourned the brother I desperately wished he had been, and I mourned the protective parents I wished I had been born to. But I did not write him back. I did not call him. My parents kept sending messages through distant relatives and flying monkeys. "Your mother is heartbroken," they would text. "Your father's health is failing due to the stress. Julian is working night shifts at a warehouse now. He's really trying to change. Families make mistakes, Ethan. Please come home." Every single one of those messages carried the exact same hidden, toxic demand. Come back and make us feel innocent again. Come back so we don't have to feel guilty anymore. I completely blocked their numbers. I changed the locks. The greatest lesson I have learned on this horrific journey is incredibly simple, but it is one that many people spend a lifetime trying to understand. Blood is not a binding contract that requires you to stay in a room where you are being actively harmed. Respect is not an optional accessory just because someone shares your last name or your DNA. Love that demands your absolute silence to keep the peace is not love at all. It is control. Setting hard boundaries is not an act of cruelty. Boundaries are how wounded people stop the wound from becoming their entire identity. Boundaries are how you survive. Now, on quiet evenings, I sit in my customized home, entirely at peace. My phone buzzes with messages from my tech team, from Sophia, who surprisingly became a very good friend after the dust settled, and from people in my support groups sharing their victories. Justice wasn't Julian losing his corporate career. Justice wasn't my parents being forced to sell their lake house and their precious cars. True justice was waking up every single morning in a house where absolutely nobody called me a burden. Justice was choosing to surround myself with people who saw my wheelchair, but still looked me dead in the eyes. Justice was taking my absolute worst pain and turning it into a multi-million-dollar tool that could help someone else survive their darkest day. Sometimes, choosing yourself over your toxic family feels like a massive betrayal. But let me promise you this. It is the very first honest lesson in survival, self-respect, and absolute freedom. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was heavy, but if you've made it this far, you know how important it is to bring these family secrets into the light. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to cut off the people who were supposed to protect you? Share your story in the comments below. This is a safe space, and your voice matters here. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next one.